Why is that? Oh, that was working. Okay. How effective is the Vatican globally and domestic? So basically, on a global scale in modern day society, looking at the Vatican from an outsider's perspective, they don't have a lot of they don't have a lot of, I would say, conscious influence. I'd say it's still a lot of subconscious. Um, and the average American society is, if you were not born from the church or had no interest in the church at a young age, you probably know nothing and or don't care. And that's what I've noticed. Unless you've been born into the church or unless you had a, early preconception that this is something that you should do, they ain't gonna know. They ain't gonna know. They ain't gonna care. And I'm sure Andrea could very well attest to this. Other people just don't have the time to even want to know what that is. Now, as far as domestic, well, we've had Junk show us the images last time that we talked about this, where the Pope is able to garner hundreds, if not thousands, if not hundreds, tens of thousands of people, all in that this big complex area, just to hear him speak. And there's no telling how many people are watching. I can't say that it's any larger than what it was, because in this day and age where, there's such a higher consciousness and awareness globally, and the amount of memes against the Pope is ridiculous at this point. And just by that fact alone, there are people that just kind of tune that out. Junk, Matt, you want to add anything on that?
I was gonna just, I haven't pulled everything together for that question yet, but one example would be Q's post, or one of the, he's made, or Q, it has made many different posts on the Vatican. One of them talks specifically about the 1832 Rothschild loan to the Holy See, which was essentially the Rothschilds funding the Vatican after one of the holy wars that had taken place, which continues to this day. So the money and political connections of the Vatican stretched far and wide, not only to places in Europe, Germany, and Italy, which we can get into in part 3, how they've affected world politics throughout the years, such as World War II, but also today and the formation of America and the Rothschilds, etc., etc. So globally and domestic is a big part to play.
Yeah, I think the only thing I really want to add, and Scooby, you made a really good point of this, is that the collective consciousness is upgrading. And people have now the awareness, or at least the catalyst, to kind of break free from that bondage of religious indoctrination, of which we'll get into. But just, it's kind of like they planted seeds so long ago, and it was the generations on generations who watered those seeds by forcing or subjugating their children into their belief system. And that is where I think they really hold the claws, is, in Italy, especially in the surrounding regions of the Vatican, that's where it kind of like trickles out from. And the influences do spread globally. And what's fascinating is I did some digging, and I found this one guy called Malachi Martin, who was basically a high-ranking exorcist at the Vatican. And he was like a whistleblower. He came out and he had like this full like testimony in writing and also on video, basically talking about a super force, an organization of Satanists within the Vatican that basically took over the Vatican in the 1960s. So whether or not this was the very core of when it was all established, or if it finally led up to majority rule, it seems as though, I mean, this is pretty obvious, this goes without saying, that Catholicism is just a cover. It's a facade to what's truly going on, which is the spread of Satanism, or polarity with God. You know, kind of going away from the divine and embracing all of the opposite, the entire shadow of that sector. And I think we can see influences of both, but they're both polarized extremes. You're either hardcore Catholic, where you're, you know, worshiping to Mother Mary and you're going through all of these rituals, or you're becoming a full-blown Satanist. Well, and again, there's like many tiers to Satanism, but in the Vatican's eyes, we're talking about kind of like the bloodline roots, like the ritualistic ball sacrifice, kind of that kind of thing. And I believe that on an international scale, when we talk about globally, we're talking about the spread of both, because both are fairly equal in that regard. And domestically, it's just as bad, because you're reinforced. Just as we talked in the last part, how the Pope has to greet, you know, the public every so often. I forget how long, but these are people that would absolutely take a bullet for a stranger. So how effective is the Vatican? Very. But it doesn't mean that they're necessarily recruiting new people. I think they're only working with what they got. They're trained soldiers, pretty much, of you know, brainwashed slaves. That's
And if they are
And,
getting more, they grew up in the church.
yeah.
There is, hold on, there is, I will let you speak. There is one point that, Junk, that you mentioned that I gotta really hammer home, and that is, they aren't teaching you to walk with God. They're teaching you to walk with Yahweh, the false God.
Lovely said. I was just gonna reiterate, Junk. I think that was a great connection you made to part one, and especially how the Masons have infiltrated their occult, dark occult practices into Christianity and the Vatican. And you're right. There's only so many people that are trusted and practicing within the order there. So they are limited in that capacity, but that does not mean you must underestimate their power and their reach globally and domestically. And you do see all of their rituals that they do for Loosh, which does have an effect. And you can see in today's politics how the Pope and the Vatican play their part, whether it's being pro-vaccine mask mandate, pro-lockdown, pro-war in Ukraine, peace for Ukraine, and anti-Russia. They're very political. You know, the Pope shouldn't be taking sides in the war, technically speaking. You know, it should just be peace all around. But it seems to be more polarized now than ever. You can really see how much of a political arm the Vatican is, and it's not the religious holy force that it seeks out first to view it as, that it wants to be, or that it wants us to believe it to be anyway. And so, yeah, it has a part in both global and domestic politics, especially when those politics leak down into your local church.
I was raised Catholic, right? Like, I went to Catholic school from preschool to 8th grade. I was an altar server. I inquired, did handbells, did it all, except get confirmed. And growing up, like, you know, you would go to church, right, and you would see like all of these people there, and especially like at the 11 a.m. mass on a Sunday. And my good friend's mom, she actually works at the school that I went to, now as the lunch lady, and she was telling me how different it is, especially post pandemic, because Catholic schools in general, but specifically the one I went to, were some of the few schools that were open only for in-person learning. So there was a whole horde of people that have no religious affiliation whatsoever sending their kids now to Catholic school, because it was A, they wanted to get away from a lot of the woke bullshit that's being pushed into public schools, and B, they wanted their kids to be learning in person, especially like, you know, in 2020, um, when everyone was going online. So now she's noticing that, well, because she doesn't go to church herself, but she's noticing that like that when the priests and stuff come in, and they're often complaining about how there's like the numbers at the school attendance are up, but the numbers at attending the church, they don't actually correlate to each other. So I feel like that's also an interesting factor that would be something more on the local level, how, you know, there are these kids now who are going to be growing up going to Catholic school, but not necessarily Catholic, which happened when I went to school. I mean, I graduated, I left, you know, graduated 8th grade in 2012. So this is over a decade now. But so there was like a handful of kids who were like completely irreligious or not even Catholic itself. Like we had a what's that called? A Hindu girl that like went to our school for a while because her parents just wanted to send her to a religious period school. But it's definitely an interesting perspective now. All these kids are going to be weirdly Catholic, but not culturally Catholic, but maybe not religiously Catholic, which is an interesting phenomena. But yeah.
Alrighty. So, do they still have any governmental or militaristic influences under their control? So this one, I would say historically has kind of died over time. I would say very early on in, let's say, the country's development, but as industrialization took hold, they kind of went into the background and controlled things more or less on a chessboard versus directly controlling a military or giving them orders per se. Do they have any governmental control? I would say most of Italy, if not all of it, and parts of other parts of Europe. Do they have power here? I'd say in areas, but the United States is just so, I'd say unfortunately, but at its benefit, so diverse in the way of thinking and the way of ethnicity. So it's too all over the place for them to really have a full stake here, I'd say.
I would say that you're right. They don't exactly have things completely under control, but I do think they have a strong influence over political ties. I know the Pope has always been an interesting figure, having politicians and generals that want to meet with them and discuss things, especially when you get into the Knights of Malta and their dealings with different intel, like for instance the CIA, and different organized groups. So
Junk, what do you think? Do they still have access to the military?
Well, I think when we talk about military or governmental influences, we have to think in terms of money. And the Vatican Bank is a very secret, thing with under dealings, backhand dealings. Like in part 2, we mentioned the documentary The Vatican Girl, which is publicly streaming on Netflix. But they talk and they actually make a lot of leeway into international connections via like mafia. And so, you have to think about the criminal underground, not only within the Vatican, but in the surrounding regions of Italy and then abroad, because just as Xenox was alluding to, the Pope and the Vatican at large has met with a lot of powerful figures, people with influences that could quite literally change the world. And if they're consulting with this branch, whatever you want to call it, a city-state, chances are that there's some kind of dirt on like it's kind of like it's like a room full of criminals and like everybody has blackmail on the other one. I kind of see it like that in like a grand scheme. So everybody has like a gun pointed towards their back and they have to like do what the other says, and it's pretty sticky, but at the same time, they are players in the game. They have accumulated, just as in England, the Queen of England, all of these places have accumulated such riches that it buys you a seat at the table. And I think that having those influences might have dithered over time, because you wouldn't have these scandals coming to light as far as the pedophilia goes and everything like that links back to the church, including, things where the public comes out and tries to become woke or whatever. Like all of these things are kind of like responses to indirect actions that they weren't necessarily anticipating. So yes, I believe that they do still have some force within society of the world at large, but it is slowly fading away as more and more people drop away or come clean. Hopefully we hear a lot more whistleblowers come out in the next several months or even years, because the truth always comes to light. That is a fact, and it's just about how long you want to stay on the ship before it sinks. And I think a lot of these people are afraid of the water, so they're gonna play dumb. They're gonna have these deals. They're gonna call you conspiracy theorists, but behind the scenes, they're terrified. And that's why I think that whatever power they had, judicially, governmental, militaristic, it's all fading away.
I have one example of here. Joseph Donovan. He was an elite Vatican personage. Donovan was dedicated to the Roman Catholic Church until his death, and he was the leader of the OSS. And the OSS is essentially the precursor to the CIA. And he was also a member of different organizations such as Phi Kappa Psi, the fraternity, which he graduated from in Colombia in 1905 and became a veteran of World War I. And later he was awarded medal, blah, blah, blah. But he was also a member, he was a Knight Grand Cross of the Order of St. Sylvester, and he was also, I don't know if he became a CIA director or not, but he was also a member of the Knights of Malta, and also William Casey, another significant figure of the CIA in World War II, was also a member of the Knights of Malta. So they really have high power up in the world politically, domestically and globally. And that's one specific example. There's plenty more. I could keep on going.
Yeah, it's crazy. So now let's kind of dial the clock back a little bit. And let's talk about probably in something that we look back on with, let's say, a magnifying, not really magnifying glass, but kind of like a nice zoomed out perspective, and kind of look at the biggest thing that they did, and that being taking out 14 books from the Bible just randomly, all because it didn't fit their narrative anymore. It didn't fit their idea of what the teachings of God were. And these books were the first book of Ezra, the second book of Ezra, the book of Tobit, the book of Judith, the rest of Esther, the wisdom of Solomon. I can't pronounce this. Ecclesiastes, also known as Sirach, and the I can't pronounce that either. Goodness, I tried. I really tried. Some of these are hard because they're not translated well, because they're just ripped out. They haven't gone through the many generations, gone through the King James version. They're still at their 1684 versions. So Baruch with the Apostle Jeremiah. I think that's how you spell apostle. It's been a while. The songs of the three holy children, the history of Susanna, and this one's fascinating to me. Bel and the Dragon, the prayer of Manasseh, and then the first book of Maccabees, the second book of Maccabees. And those numbers right there don't equal to 14, no. But Solomon himself, they took out either 4 or 6 books on him alone, and he had, that it went up to Solomon 6, if I understand that correctly. I might be butchering that. Please, in the comments, please fix that. But I know there are a lot of books that they took out from Solomon. And we'll go into more about Solomon, why his teachings are fascinating as to why they took all of them out, pretty much leaving no trace other than mention in the Bible.
What I find interesting, though, is yes, they took all of these books out, but still the Catholic Bible is bigger than the non-Catholic Bible.
Right?
So it's like, so there's even more that's being continued to be taken out, depending on whether or not you follow Catholicism at all. Now,
right.
it's not that much. It's like there's a couple passages at the end of a couple books, I think, is the biggest difference. But it's still text being taken out of what is supposed to be Word of God.
Because from what I understand, the King James version that we understand today, that is generally passed around and is generally, known and is sold at every freaking Bible store possible, is the revisions from Martin Luther. It's like the Protestant version of the Bible, not the Catholicism version.
You can actually, like, when you go look up versions of the Bible, you'll often find, versions that'll be like NIV, and then you'll see NIV-C. And then the C will usually indicate that it's for Catholic readers.
Yep.
So, and that Bible is always going to be a little bit longer.
It's fascinating.
But I have a book here. I've referenced this book a lot. The God, Man, the Word Made Flesh. And this book even goes into books that were taken out of the Bible in the era of Constantine. And so now there's even more books that aren't included. And these were taken out, when did they say? Or not Constantine. Was it Constantine? I'm not sure now. But if you want to hear a list of all these ones, just listen to this. You got the books of Adam and Eve, the lives of Adam and Eve, the Apocalypse of Moses, the Slavonic Book of Eve, the writings attributed to Enoch, the Great Prophetic Book of Enoch, the Lost Book of Noah, the Apocalypse of Baruch, his vision of heaven, the story of Ahikar, no, the old Armenian version, the Newfound Ancient Book, the Gospels of Christ's childhood, the Proto-Evangelium, or the original Gospel of James, the Gospel of Thomas the Doubter, the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew, the Arabic Gospel of the Infancy, the Gospels of Nicodemus, the Greek Gospel of Nicodemus, a later Gospel, the harrowing of hell, the Acts of Pilate, and the letters of Pilate. So this is all even more stuff that's not even included in the Bible anymore.
Why am I not surprised? You know, like we're just so duped. We don't even know it. Well, we do. Of course we do, but the majority of us don't understand how duped we have been for so long.
But do we even know how duped we are still? Huh.
I think as us truthers, we have more of a grasp on how duped we have been versus others. You know, we unfortunately have been given the big task of when all of this becomes the light to be the great console workers, because they're going to need them. Imagine that. Truthers in tinfoil hats becoming the great social workers of our society.
The therapists of the new earth.
Seriously, though. Like,
but this whole like idea of though that like to go back to like the original question though was like the whole idea that, and I've brought this up to Christians and they always get so flustered, is okay, so the Bible is supposed to be the word of God that was spoken to a man who was then supposed to write it down. And then, you know, being man, we're obviously imperfect. So there's going to be things, right, that we could potentially get wrong. Like maybe we write something down wrong, right? Okay, that's a human mistake. But then you get to the point of purposeful manipulation. So at what point is this Bible no longer the actual word of God? And it's just the word of, you know, that's been filtered down through however many hands, has been edited, and then has entire sections of it removed. I mean, it's like if you take a book, like if you take the first book of Harry Potter, right? And then you just delete entire chapters and then re-edit certain parts of the story. Is it still written by J.K. Rowling? Is it still Harry Potter? It's not. So then what are you reading? What are you centering your entire life, your entire existence upon? What are you raising your children upon? Like, I'm sorry, I don't trust Emperor Constantine in 600 AD to have the heart of hearts, to create the Council of Nicaea, which is what deleted all of those books that I read off from this book. And this book goes in a lot about talking about all particularly talking about how Constantine definitely wasn't Catholic, even though if you hear Catholics talk about Constantine, you'll often hear them say how he converted to Catholicism, like he was an open pagan before, but he converted to Catholicism. But even when he said he was converted to Catholicism, he was still partaking in pagan sacrifice rituals. Like he literally boiled his wife in a vat of oil and killed her, and like sacrificed her in that way, among other things. And so you really trust him to be the man that edits the word of God.
it's your connection to source energy.
Exactly.
Wow, coming in with the fire punches there. Love it, Andrea. Junk, you got anything to add to that?
Well, I think to kind of lay a foundation, the Bible, in essence, for the old world, was like a tutorial on like spirituality. It's like, hey, these are instructions, follow them, etc., whatever. Even though I have my own biases to that, because I do believe, just as Andrea said that, and you said, Our connection to God isn't through some words written on a page passed along for generations. It's through each of us, within us. And for them to edit or redact passages from whatever the original one was, regardless if it began with a pure intention, definitely went through the telephone effect and got distorted by somebody who was, service to self along the way. Or it was always that way. It's hard to tell because we weren't there, and it's like it's one of those things where you just have to speculate on. But any type of censoring of information from the public is always seen as a counteractive effect in limiting the consciousness of individuals. So if these passages were more enlightening, maybe more more so instructions on how to become sovereign once again, or anything of the nature. Of course, big church doesn't want that in your brain. They want the exact opposite. So it's hard to say. You listed out a few passages, and as did everything that we've spoken on previously. But at the same time, we have to take a different perspective on what the Bible is, which is a mechanism of control. It's one of the most popular books. Well, I don't know if it might be the most popular book in the world. I believe it is, because you go to any hotel or Motel 6 and it's in the drawer, whether it's the Holy Bible or the Catholic Bible. This is a very influential text. So for them to consciously redact or edit in any way is just absolute proof positive that they're trying to do something nefarious.
Absolutely. So what is so important about Solomon and his teachings? Well, we have to understand that Solomon himself was a king, and you want to say something, Hope? Oh, trying to say something. Hold on, hold it up again. You should be able to be unmuted. Your microphone is available. The only one that's muted in the channel that can't speak on their own is the record bot. Oh, huh. Let me try. Okay, try again. Because you should have access to speak now. I don't know why you didn't before, which is strange. Yeah, I have unmuted you. You should be able to speak. I don't know why you can't. Strange. Like, I've given you the ability. It tells me that I can mute you right now, which means that you're unmuted. Yeah, your microphone. Oh,
Why don't you leave and try coming back in?
I don't know, Hope. Junk says to try and leave and come back.
Not just leave and come back, but leave and exit everything out and then come back.
Hope, if you want to give it one more try, try pressing the unmute button and see if we could hear you. Alright, go ahead and try and speak now.
No, we
No,
can't hear
no.
you. I think that might be on your computer's end. I don't think that's us. Alrighty. Alright, so what's so important about Solomon and his teachings? So, from what I understand, he was a king, but he was a very greedy one. But he had a very interesting way of looking at life, and he brought a lot of his experience down in his teachings and understood the world in a very, I want to say, brutalistic manner, but also with a... The best way to describe him is, think of Andrew Tate in the early 1300s, from what I understand that he was around. Let me double check that. I don't want to be wrong there. No, my apologies. He reigned from 970 to 931 BCE, so even older. But he was a monarch of ancient Israel and the son and successor of David. So he was the son of David, which is, even more fascinating, and why he had such a brutalistic manner. So like I said, the best way to look at him is like an Andrew Tate of that era, very masculine, very strong in his ideals, and very strong about how, life is and how it should be. So it's very fascinating to see them kind of straight up destroy this person and his history. And if you ever have the time, even just reading a few passages from Solomon is fascinating, because his ideas on how he goes about life and how he looks at even the basic things is just fascinating, from somebody who grew up as the son who took down Goliath. Okay, can you try now?
Thank you.
There you go. All right. Who wants to answer this next one? Junk, do you want to?
The importance of the Pope.
Yeah.
Kind of in the same way as any given celebrity, they are the face of the business. And like, again, the passing of the torch to each pope, as we described in our previous episode, is all about consensus between the archbishops. So I would say the Pope in general is seen as a martyr. It's just like Mother Teresa, like they can do no wrong, etc. They're the justice in a world of corrupt individuals, quote unquote. I think the importance of the Pope lies in the stances that they uphold, or the statements that they release to the general public, because that is basically the collective intention of the Vatican funneled in through one person. We obviously know that the Pope himself, whoever is elected at that correct time period, isn't the one formulating these speeches, isn't the one saying these things. He's just the poster child. Um, he goes as he follows. And have there been good popes in the past? Maybe. There have been horrible ones? Yes. We don't. I mean, it's pretty fair. The energy of the current pope, you know exactly his stance, obviously, but I think more or less it's just about seeing what they're saying, dissecting it, studying it, but also keeping an eye on it, because in general we are so fixated and focused on our elected officials, by whatever means necessary, that we kind of forget about these religious organizations and how much power they truly have. So I think the importance lies in whatever they're showcasing openly to the public, and concealed behind closed doors is another conversation, but it gives us an idea, or, you know, a peephole into the inner workings of the Vatican via the intention of their words.
Okay.
Yeah, quite literally. Did you know the Pope was like in a climate change documentary?
No,
Yeah.
that's weird.
Well, this new pope is Jesuit and woke as fuck.
Got it. Makes sense now. What method of indoctrination do they continue to instill in their followers that remains unchanged throughout the centuries? So I would say there's two levels to this one. There's the fear, and there's the hymns. I'm going to repeat that. There's the fear, and there's the hymns. They get you by the balls with fear if you're highly suggestible and very, new to the whole realm of spirituality and understanding dark versus light, because it does exist, and we all know it does, because we live in a dualistic reality. They get you by the balls, or they get you, they get you by your fear, and then they make you feel comfortable with the hymns. They make you feel like one of them with the hymns. They make you feel like you are part of them with the hymns. And it's a psychological game. And the moment you step through those doors, it's constantly trying to convince you of the game.
May I add something?
Go for it.
And also the rituals that are participated as a collective.
Yep. How they have everybody in the church gather around every time they, whatever day they do it throughout the month, they gather everybody that they can, even from people that go to different churches on a regular basis, go to this very special one to partake in the group ritual. It is crazy. Like there were, when I did go to church when I was younger and we all had our communion, there were people that would normally go to other churches come to ours. And I'm just like, why are you here? Oh, we're here for communion. Why? Oh, why not? But you're never here. So? What?
It's a hive mind.
Yep. Sure is.
You also have to talk about, I don't know if you necessarily would call it the indoctrination itself, or indoctrination in and of itself, but a part of it is the wonder and the beauty of stepping in to a historic, nice Catholic church.
Yeah.
Like,
with stained
with
glass.
the stained glass and the statues and the altar, the whole I can't remember what it's called now.
The
The
acoustics,
yeah, the
the
acoustics, all that.
organ.
Like the church that I went to growing up was it was actually made it's like a pretty old church that it was still designed to be able to do Latin mass. And for those who have never been in Latin Mass for I think almost the entire Mass, the priest is facing away from you. He's facing Jesus, actually, because there's a cross always usually behind him. And so what our church had was a perfectly curved wall that was specifically like geometrically engineered for the area of our church to project the pastor, the priest's voice to the entire church when you stand right in the center, right behind the altar where he would be during the whole Mass. It was kind of like one of those there's those exhibits, or what's that? There's that one pyramid in South America where it's like if you stand at certain parts, like it'll echo like all the way across. It was almost like one of those kinds of things where it's like you can go throughout the church and yeah, you can project your voice pretty well if you're yelling, but you go to that one spot back there and it's like it's magical. Like that's what, when we were altar servers, that's what we used to do. We used to just mess around in the church and stuff to kill time so we didn't have to go back to school. And and that's what we would do. We would like stand there and then you would project your voice throughout the whole church. And when we actually did a Latin Mass, like you feel it. There is something very that speaks to the human soul when you hear someone chanting in Latin in such a very just like a very ritualistic kind of way. Like it can move you in a lot of ways, and you're in that environment. You're surrounded by the stained glass and the incense and all the pretty everything, and it makes you ripe for just taking it all in. It kind of just like it like soothes it, like almost like pacifies your brain almost, and it puts you in such a comforting atmosphere that you can just take whatever the priest is spewing at you regardless of the content of it.
It's fascinating. Junk, did you have any similar experiences with the pyramids that you went to, or any type of experience like that?
Yeah, well, I mean that's a different topic and conversation, but yeah, you can sense energy, especially in its primordial, unrefined state. This question right now that we're talking about indoctrination is actually one of the ones I was looking forward to the most tonight, because this in itself is one of the, oh my god, this could be a full episode. I'm going to try to condense it a little bit, but I really want to pull everybody back, backward. Let's rewind, and let's go back to even before modern day humans were settled and kind of just like seeding the planet with consciousness. The whole idea of embarking upon life within this world, within physicality, is to forget your vast knowing of self throughout the universe, to become a uniquely distinct ego enjoying an experience for a temporary amount of time. Now, fast forward a little bit, we start to live, and all of a sudden religions form because of what you said, Scoop, which is predicated on fear. And the fear is a result of the unknown. It's about being so distinctly terrified of dying, of leaving whatever existence you think you know behind in exchange for another experience, that the self-serving few at the time, wherever they were in the collective, decided to capitalize on that. So yes, fear is an absolute driver for control, and having that influence over people is one of the tightest grips that you can achieve, especially when you're trying to dominate societies and entire cultures, because at the end of the day, it remains the unknown. Unless you've had in modern day your own spiritual awakening and you've come to the truth of what reality is and who you are, until that breakthrough happens, we are all susceptible to contemplating the blackness of death, or the void of stepping into unfamiliarity. And I think that the church knows this. It knows that no matter what, you could put somebody in a situation, like at their heels, and in the very last moments, you're going to see whatever vulnerable side of that individual come out. And more often than not, out of sheer fear, they're going to pray. They are going to, what is it called when you ask to remove your sins? They're going to try to do all of that.
Baptize.
Confession.
No,
Confess.
repent, confess. Yeah,
Or
exactly.
repent, yeah.
So they're going to try to do all of this because seated deep in their mind, there was an organization, most likely when they were children growing up, that traumatized them into this fear of an ultimatum of, if you aren't exactly the human that you're supposed to be, which is quite literally impossible, we all make mistakes, just as Andrea mentioned, then you are damned to eternity for hell, and you're going to burn, and blah, 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 and all this stuff, which, it's just funny side note. How are you going to burn when you're non-physical? But whatever. And it's either that or heaven. And so these people are left with an ultimatum in their own solitude of the mind, which is a very scary and vulnerable place to be in, especially if you have nothing to grasp onto, if you don't have self-awareness or a foundation of any kind of connection to God or source, whatever. You are going to be seeking out somebody who you think does. And ego latches on to that false perception that, certain organizations like the Vatican have an elected official who is God's chosen one. We don't get into savior complexes or anything like that, but basically that's what they do, is they boost themselves up to the highest regard. They go full throttle with the power and the prestige. And what that does is it shows people that they have to follow or they have to lead. And when given the free will choice to face the ultimatum head on, most people will choose to follow. And I wouldn't say it's a sad fact. I think everybody has their own experience on Earth, even if they're under unconscious control. But at the same time, it's realizing that at the very end, beyond money, beyond blackmailing, the one thing you can get every single person with as a final means for enslavement is fear of the unknown, fear that they might be damned to eternity, fear that when they close their chapter, it's all over for them. Their existence evaporates. But the truth is, that is simply an orchestrated means of indoctrination. And I know everyone here in this chat and everyone watching the replay of this episode is going to know that life goes on, that the sun isn't just 60 years old. The earth keeps moving. The cosmos is in perpetual motion. And that lives come and go as a continuous form of energy exchange. And that's why they are absolutely adamant about censoring and suppressing anything Great Awakening movement, because they see that what we are doing now simply by embodying higher consciousness, is countering every effort they've made to close the eyes, to conceal the imagination, to not let you believe in anything that isn't prescribed to you through lecture and dictated by a church at Mass. It's unfortunate that so many have fallen to this blue pill of indoctrination, but I do see a lot of people waking up, especially the ones that have been programmed since birth, pretty much, because society nowadays, you're following the leader, and the leader are your parents. And the parents are following their leader, which was their parents, even if it's a trauma response. It's just familiarity. So that's where it comes down to, and I'll just finish my point here, which is it's either embracing the unknown or running from it. And if you run from it, you're running into a cage. And that cage is the indoctrination of your own spiritual evolution.
That was a beautiful ending point to that conversation. And as we normally do here to wrap things up on the mystery school, let's take a nice look at our sun.
I kind of just have something
Keep going.
to add on to
Keep
that
going.
thought.
Keep going. Keep going. While I get it up, don't worry. I can sit here for a
No,
bit.
just pretty much it's because you might have seen me post about a scuba, but it's something that I've been like pondering about lately is the whole concept of like internalized divinity versus externalized divinity, and how
Mhm.
like religions like Catholicism and just general Christianity in general just forces you into externalizing your own internal divinity. And it's something that's like when I see that in people around me, I notice a common thread among them, like especially people who were like might have been raised Christian or raised Catholic and then went through a period of not giving, like not caring, like exploring other things, but then falling back into Christianity again, usually even harder than they were growing up because now they're doing it willingly rather than just being raised into it. Is that either A, they lived a very traumatic life, or B, they, oh, this sounds so mean to say, but it's the easiest way of saying it. They're not really fully capable of independent thought, where it's like the majority of all of their thoughts seem to just be comprised of what other people have told them. They don't really like critically think about a lot of the things that they're told. And I've noticed that like a lot of the people in my life who've done that fall into one of those two categories. And it kind of makes sense because, you know, if you've experienced a lot of trauma, it can almost be comforting to then fall into a religion that you know, kind of solidifies the idea that humans are just these terrible, weak humans, these terrible, weak little plebs that are in desperate need of saving rather than needing to be saved externally rather than being capable of being saved by yourself, which is something that, you know, it's kind of feels almost impossible to do when you lived a very traumatic life. And for the other point is that I feel like it's why I see a lot of NPC Christians, because it's very easy to program yourself using just Christianity and not have to, like, you know, have anything outside of that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's like
It's easy to
they could
keep in
just
the bubble.
yes, yeah, and it's like, so it's like you see, I just see both of those two things, and it makes me wonder, like the whole idea. It's just like another. It's a thought that I'm continuing to try, and I've continuously pondered for about the past couple months now, and the connection between that and like the amount of actual NPCs on this planet, which is something that has plagued me for years. But